During my sister's wedding, my father's girlfriend suddenly hit me with a sandal and yelled, "Get out!" The shock left everyone speechless, but what happened next changed the entire atmosphere of the event. My name is Natalie Pearson. I am 30 years old and doing well in my marketing career. Or at least I thought I was until my family drama got out of hand. Everything changed when my younger sister Grace began planning her wedding. I was right there with her, assisting her with every decision and choice, trying to plan the perfect day for her dot. However, it quickly became clear that this was going to be far more complicated than I had anticipated. The shadow of our father, Robert, hung over everything. Ever since his divorce, he had not been the same. He'd gotten into a mess of alcohol and bad decisions. The worst was his new girlfriend, Tanya. From the moment I met her, something felt off. She seemed overly calculating and predatory. One day, while Grace and I were picking flowers, she looked at me with concern in her eyes. "Natalie, do you think Dad will show up sober?" she inquired softly, almost pleading. I desperately wanted to comfort her, so I smiled as I squeezed her hand. "I sincerely hope so, Grace. For your sake, I do. But deep down, I knew that hope alone would not be enough." As the wedding day approached, I felt less like a maid of honor and more like a peacekeeper caught between my sister's wishes and my father's chaos. My boyfriend Adam was my rock. Throughout the revelation, he'd hold me close whenever I complained about it, saying, "You can't control everything." I would sigh in response, "I understand, but if Dad ruins this day for Grace, I will never forgive him." Little did I know that things were about to get out of control. About a week before the wedding, I met my best friend Emily for coffee. She has always been my voice of reason, and I needed her more than ever. "What's really going on between you and Tanya?" she inquired, her eyes narrowing in concern. I leaned in. I'm lowering my voice. "There's something wrong with Emily. She quickly bonded with her father and is constantly whispering to him. I even overheard her on the phone discussing a big score coming up." Emily's eyes widened. "Do you think she is taking advantage of him?" I shook my head, unsure. "I don't know, but I'll find out." That conversation sparked a fire in me. I started digging, spending late nights scrolling through social media, making quiet phone calls to some of Dad's old friends, and attempting to piece together a picture that was becoming more sinister by the day. The more I looked, the more I felt like I was unraveling a puzzle that I wasn't sure I wanted to solve. Grace and I were at the venue the day before the wedding, making final preparations, when Dad and Tanya unexpectedly arrived. Daddy Grace squealed and ran to hug him. I stayed back and kept a close eye on them. Tanya's gaze darted around the room as if she were assessing everything objectively. Dad, on the other hand, slurred "my little girl, now grown up." My heart sank. He was already drunk. "Robert, darling, let's check out the bar," Tanya said, giving me a triumphant smile as they walked away. I felt rage well up inside of me, but I forced myself to remain calm for Grace's sake. Grace turned to face me. Her eyes were glistening with tears. "Natalie." I drew her into a hug before she could finish. "Don't worry, sis. Tomorrow is about you and Michael. Nothing will ruin it. If only I'd realized how wrong I was. They say there is always a calm before the storm." Our storm was brewing, and it was about to strike with the force of a Category 7 hurricane. The ceremony itself was stunning. Grace looked radiant, and for a brief moment, all of the family drama seemed to fade away. Standing next to her as she exchanged vows with Michael, I felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps we can get through the day without any disasters. But that fragile hope was dashed the moment we stepped into the reception hall. I spotted him almost immediately. Dad is already drunk and standing by the bar, with Tanya by his side. My heart sank. "You okay?" Adam whispered, sensing my unease. "I've got to keep it together for Grace." I muttered and forced a smile. But deep down, I knew something was going to go horribly wrong. The tension in the room grew unbearable as the night went on. Dad's laughter grew louder, and his movements became increasingly erratic. Tanya kept looking around the room. A strange gleam in them made my skin crawl. Something was wrong, and I could feel it. "Natalie, Dad's causing a scene," Grace whispered, her voice shaking. "I will handle it," I said, attempting to convey confidence. I walked over to where Dad was doing an unsteady Macarena, stumbling and laughing like a fool. "Dad, let us get some fresh air," I suggested, trying to remain calm. "Nonsense," he muttered. "I'm celebrating my baby girl's special day." He attempted to twirl, but almost fell over. Tanya appeared at his side and tightened her grip on his arm. "Leave him alone." "He's having fun," she remarked sharply. "This isn't for fun. It's about respecting Grace on her special day," I replied, struggling to maintain a steady voice. "Do you think you're perfect?" she sneered, always attempting to control everything. The argument quickly escalated. We moved to a quieter corner, but our voices grew louder. "You know nothing about our family." I spat, my patience waning. She hissed, "Your daddy prefers my company to yours." Something inside of me snapped. "Is this before or after you drained his money, Tanya?" I snapped back, my voice trembling with rage. Her face twisted with rage, and before I could react, she lunged at me with her heeled sandal. As the heel struck my temple, time seemed to slow, and pain spread throughout my skull. Guests screamed and chaos erupted. Chairs were overturned and the scene became a blur of noise and movement through the chaos. All I could think of was Grace. How had it gotten to this? Security arrived quickly, restraining Tanya as she hurled obscenities at everyone nearby. The police arrived and took her away in handcuffs. In that brief moment, I caught a glimpse of my father. He seemed completely lost and broken. That was the moment I realized things would never be the same again. The days following the wedding row are a blur of police reports, interviews, and sleepless nights. I felt like I was living in a nightmare. Every little sound made me jump, and I kept picturing Tanya lunging at me with that sandal. Adam, my rock throughout all of this, held me close whenever the nightmares struck. "You quote, re-safe now, Natalie," he said softly, attempting to console me. But feeling safe seemed impossible. How could I feel safe when my father's girlfriend attempted to attack me at my sister's wedding? Grace was understandably distraught when I visited her about a week after everything happened. She could not even look at me. "All those months of planning," she lamented, her voice heavy with sadness. "And for what? My wedding will always be remembered as the day someone attempted to harm my sister." "Grace, I'm deeply sorry." I began to feel a strong sense of guilt. She cut me off and shook her head. "I know it's not your fault, Natalie, but I can't stop feeling like our family is cursed." While Grace dealt with her pain, Dad was in complete denial. He called me constantly and left voicemails that made my blood boil. "Natalie, sweetie, don't overreact," he'd say. Tanya was simply upset. She didn't mean any harm. Hearing him defend her in that manner after everything she had done was infuriating. The final straw came when he showed up at my apartment, smelling of alcohol. Hearing him defend Tanya after everything was infuriating. The final straw came when he showed up at my apartment, smelling of alcohol. I opened the door to see him swaying slightly and his eyes glassy. "Dad, you should leave," I said, struggling to maintain a steady voice. "But Pumpkin, we are family. We need to stick together." He slurred and sounded pitiful. I felt something harden inside me as I looked at him. "No comma, Dad. We're finished. I can't do it anymore." The pain in his eyes almost made me hesitate. Almost. But as I closed the door in his face, I knew I was doing the right thing. I couldn't keep enabling his destructive behavior. He wasn't just harming himself anymore. He was ripping our family apart. Meanwhile, Emily, my ever-determined best friend, had begun investigating Tanya's past. What she revealed left me speechless. "Natalie, look at this," she said one night while spreading papers across my coffee table. "Tanya has a record. Assault, fraud, identity theft, you name it. She's finished it." I scanned the documents. My heart sinks. How did Dad not know about this? Emily hesitated and bit her lip. "That's it, Natalie. I believe he did. The truth struck me like a ton of bricks. We discovered joint bank accounts, suspicious money transfers, and evidence that Dad wasn't just a victim. He was an accomplice. Telling Grace what we discovered was one of the most difficult things I've ever had to do. We sat together in her kitchen. The wedding gifts are still sitting in the corner, untouched. She whispered, "I can't believe it." Tears were streaming down her face. How could he have done this to us? I don't even know him anymore. I don't know who Dad is either. I said softly, "but we need to protect ourselves now." Grace looked at me, her expression ranging from devastation to determination. "I'm with you, Natalie. Whatever it takes." Despite her words, the guilt hung heavy on me. I had exposed our father's crimes, and by doing so, I risked ruining his life. But hadn't he already done it to himself? The combination of anger, confusion, and guilt was too much for me to bear alone. So I decided to get professional help. That's how I ended up sitting in a therapist's office, trying to make sense of it all. Natalie. It's normal to experience conflict. My therapist, Dr. Evans, reassured me during one of our sessions. "You've gone through something traumatic. You're grieving the death of a father you thought you knew." I looked down at my hands, feeling torn. But shouldn't I hate him? After everything he has done? "There is no should in terms of emotions," she explained gently. "What matters is that you acknowledge your feelings and work through them." Working through it seemed simple, but it wasn't. Still, as I left Dr. Evans's office that day, I felt a glimmer of hope. It wasn't much, but it was the beginning. Maybe, just maybe, I could salvage something positive from my family's past 4 months following the wedding disaster. Despite everything that had happened, I found myself in a situation in which I never expected to be happy. I had a strong support system. Grace, Adam, Emily, and I have formed an unbreakable team. Our bond was as strong as ever. Grace raised her glass to new beginnings one night during our dinner at my apartment. She toasted her family. The one we chose. I also clinked glasses with my sister. Tanya's trial received extensive media coverage. It was a circus. Sitting in that courtroom, my stomach turned as Tanya's true nature was revealed for all to see. Dad sat beside me, stunned, as her criminal history was revealed. However, the real shock was yet to come. Emily, and I have worked tirelessly to collect evidence of Dad's involvement in Tanya's schemes. During the trial, our lawyer stood up to address the court. "Your Honor, we have evidence proving Robert Pearson's involvement in Miss Thompson's fraudulent activities. As the legal battle progressed, my personal life took an unexpected turn for the better. My career began to take off. One Sunday afternoon, my boss summoned me to his office. "Natalie, we are promoting you to Senior Marketing Director." He replied with a smile. "This past year, you've demonstrated incredible resilience and creativity." I left his office in a daze, calling Adam right away to tell him the news. "Babe, that's incredible. I'm really proud of you," he exclaimed with excitement in his voice. Despite the chaos, Grace and Michael made a wonderful decision. They chose to renew their vows. This time, they held a small, intimate ceremony in their backyard for only close friends and family. Michael joked that the second time was the charm, which made Grace laugh as they exchanged rings again. While watching them, I felt a sense of calm wash over me. We were finally healing all of ourselves. The day of Tanya's sentencing arrived, and the courtroom was tense as the judge prepared to deliver the verdict. As I sat there, I reflected on how far we had come since our fateful wedding day. We had been through so much pain and betrayal, but we had managed to survive. We were stronger, and we were progressing. It wasn't easy, but we eventually found our way back together. The storm had passed, and we were finally at peace again. I stood up and delivered my victim impact statement. My hands shook, but my voice remained steady. "The scars from that night are deep," I began, "but they have made me stronger." I looked directly at Tanya, knowing that this was my moment. I want to reclaim my life. I am here today not as a victim, but as a survivor. Tanya was led away in handcuffs, and I felt a sense of closure. It felt as if a long and painful chapter in my life was finally coming to an end. The real celebration, however, occurred a month later. Grace, Michael, Emily, and I gathered at my favorite restaurant to celebrate my promotion and everything we'd accomplished together. To Natalie. Emily raised her glass and smiled widely. "The strongest person I know." I couldn't let her finish without including all of us. I looked around, seeing the faces of those who had stood by me through the most difficult year of my life. For demonstrating that family is more than just blood, it is about loyalty and love. As we laughed and told stories, I felt something shift within me. I noticed how much had changed. The past year had felt like a nightmare, but strangely enough, it had also been a gift. It made me realize who really mattered. It taught me how strong I could be and gave me the courage to remove the negative and toxic influences in my life. Sitting there, surrounded by genuine love and happiness, I knew it was my happy ending. It was not perfect, and it left scars. But it was real, which made it beautiful. For the first time in a long time, I felt optimistic about my future. I was grateful for the family I'd found and the inner strength I'd discovered. So that's where my story ends. But I am curious about your thoughts. Here quote as the next story. I'm 39 and male. My wife Alex is 37. We have been married for approximately 5 years, despite my working more than 50 hours per week and Alex only working 20. She expected me to contribute equally to all domestic duties. I'll come home after working 12 hours, only to be bombarded with requests for me to do a variety of tasks. When I mention that I just got off work, Alex always uses the same argument. That was your daytime job. You have a wife, and now you must contribute to your household responsibilities. This is not to say that I refuse to do any household chores. I cook, clean up, and do my own laundry. Alex appears to believe that I should be doing just as much as her. It quote s worth noting that Alex appears to be overconfident about his accomplishments, as her cleaning method is to start something for 20 minutes. Yeah, she was distracted by her phone for 6 hours before returning to do it for another preteen minute. In her mind, this equals 6 hours and 20 minutes of work. My company closed my branch office 2 months ago and gave us all the option to work from home. I set up an office at home because we had an extra room. Alex complained about it the entire time, asking where her room was, as if she didn't have complete control over the decor of the rest of the house, and I prepared for my first day. But from the start, it was a nightmare. Alex refused to leave me alone. Every 10 to 20 minutes, she would tell me to do something. Around 3 weeks ago, I found myself logging back in after she went to bed every day to finish up my work. Alex pushed it too far. She barged in, complaining about a pen I had left on the dining table. At the time, I was in a Zoom meeting with a client, and I kept holding my palm up off camera to tell her to stop. Alex did not take this calmly, and after about 30 seconds of attempting to get my attention, she screamed at the top of her lungs in frustration and stormed away. The client believed someone was being murdered, and I had to lie to him that it was just some kids playing. Alex later gave me a lame non-apology, essentially telling me that I shouldn't have ignored her, but I knew at the time that things were not going well. I gave my boss 2 weeks' notice. He was upset and tried to persuade me to stay, but I couldn't keep up with the workload anymore. During those 2 weeks, I started looking for a new job, and I found one that needed someone for 20 hours per week. The pay was good. The interview went well. Naturally, it wasn't via Zoom, and they hired me on the spot. I broke the news to Alex yesterday. She was furious when I told her I could now contribute equally around the house and assist my wife with her domestic chores. She asked how much I would earn and flipped a lid, when she discovered that I would earn significantly less. Am I the idiot? This can't be real. Instead of getting a wife, the guy gets rid of his job. Make sure it makes sense. You're the idiot. If he gets rid of the wife first, she will receive half of the alimony. If he gets rid of the job and she leaves, she gets half the pay, and he can pursue a real career again. Alimony is typically granted for a set period of time to allow the recipient to find work, receive training, or do whatever else they desire. The only time it could be forever is if an older couple has been good together for decades. What OPI said made sense to me. It's a shame he didn't get fired from his previous job due to her behavior. It's a trump card in alimony proceedings. He should have just informed his boss. Listen, I am deeply sorry for this, and I know you don't understand why. However, if you believe you need to discipline or fire me because of my wife's behavior at home, I implore you to do so. So you hate each other. The concept here is to include everyone. Dude, your contempt for your own spouse is as repulsive as her behavior. Women like this are toxic, and reducing your work hours will never be enough. Because anything less than what she demands is considered toxic masculinity, patriarchy, and financial abuse. Save yourself and leave now, before you legally accumulate more years with her. I'm on the spectrum, so it's difficult for me to tell. My older sister was diagnosed with anxiety. I understand that anxiety can manifest itself in a variety of ways, but both my sister and I believe that someone is using their anxiety to manipulate me. I quote Emma Girl. Trey is the son of one of Dad's friends. He would occasionally come around, and we became friends. He then asked me out, and we dated for a month. We go to the same school, and this is our first year taking classes together. He makes it clear that he's concerned for me and everyone around us. We have 4 classes together, so we sit at the same table. He is the issue. I believe Trey is faking his anxiety or using it to his advantage. In the 2 classes where we sit together, he always starts breathing heavily and develops a worried expression, burying his face in his hands and taking shaky breaths. It lasts about 20 seconds before repeating itself after about 20 minutes. I know how to be polite and ask if he's okay, but it feels strange after knowing my sister. She appears genuinely afraid of panic attacks. Trey does not appear scared. Rather, he appears to calm down immediately after receiving empathy. I occasionally catch him smirking or having an anxiety attack, claiming that the world is collapsing around him over and over, and then run over to adjacent tables to put his head on their desks and elicit sympathy, which I find distracting. However, he does not leave until someone asks him if he is okay. He just seems off, as if he's having an anxiety attack. He'd be simply trying to get through it. As a result, I find it difficult to immediately consider running to adjacent tables and announcing it. I assume that most people do not want others to know when they experience panic attacks. He is doing it more and more. It seems like a daily occurrence right now. He only started after we started dating. We don't sit close together in either of the 2 classes. He will never experience an anxiety attack. He will be talking loudly to his friends. It's just kind of off because his behavior is never consistent. Anyway, he doesn't do this anxiety stuff in front of his father or when we're together. The guy exudes charisma. Otherwise, be kind and polite. But yes. After a month, I began to suspect that he was seeking attention and sympathy from others. So I broke up with him politely. I just made an excuse that I wasn't prepared. I needed time to properly phrase the news for Dad, so I kept it to myself. Our families ate dinner together last weekend in front of everyone. Trey asked me why I ended our relationship, a huge surprise for everyone. He began accusing me of seeing someone else as the reason, because I was giving him less attention at school, and I didn't handle it well. But I was embarrassed and angry, so I impulsively explained that it was because he was a dramatic person who used his anxiety to manipulate others. There is no more sound. Awkward. Drive home. Dad is angry with me. My other family members are also angry with me. Am I the idiot for holding this opinion, or am I the idiot for my actions? If the dude asks you that question in front of an audience, he is taking a chance on getting an honest response. He proved your point. If the family is so angry, you could simply ask them. So, are you saying I owe him intimacy? Because he's a family friend who has anxiety? Who else do I owe this to? And see how quickly they avoid. Question. One day, this guy will propose to his unsuspecting girlfriend in public, hoping she will be too polite to decline. Sure, you could have been more diplomatic in the situation, but he pushed you into a corner. If you have to deal with anger from both families, it's a small price to pay to avoid what was clearly the wrong relationship for you. Be proud of how you stood up for yourself and refused to back down. I'm going to stop accusing him of faking and play his game. I ended our relationship because it was clear that I was constantly causing you anxiety. No, everything is fine when I'm not around. But you have an attack whenever I am with you. This type of relationship was not going to work. I believe you should also show what you wrote here to your father. Hopefully, this will allow him to be a little more objective about the situation. I am 34 years old, female, and have a twin son. I am a vocal author. After his mother died, I became his godparent and adopted him as a toddler. His father was never involved. Author has always struggled to make friends, but he made a great one this year. A tween boy in his grade who will go by the name Elliot. I hadn't planned on it, but Elliot's father, an 83-year-old male named Edward, and I became very close. We come from very diverse backgrounds. Edward grew up in a stable, high-income family, spending the majority of his childhood in Europe before moving to our area about a year and a half ago. I grew up in a low-income family and was raised by my uncle after my mother passed away. I had a difficult childhood and was involved in crime when I was younger, but I've stayed on the straight and narrow for Arthur's sake. I didn't want my relationship with Edward to disrupt Arthur and Elliot's friendship. Still, they agreed that the boys would always come first. We started loosely dating about a year ago. Arthur became ill a few weeks ago, while Edward was watching him. I was an hour away, fixing something at a friend's house, when Edward took Arthur to the emergency room. When things became worse, his appendix had burst. When I arrived, Arthur was in surgery and had gone into anaphylactic shock due to the anesthesia. The doctors began asking about the family's medical history. I was unable to provide any information because I am not biologically related to Arthur. I didn't know his mother's family. Edward tried to help, but I became panicked and lashed out, claiming that Arthur was not my biological son. Edward stepped away to give me space. Arthur is fine now, but he had some complications and spent several weeks in the hospital. Since then, Edward and I have barely spoken due to an argument that ensued. Edward was upset because I had not told him Arthur was adopted. I understand why, but it never came up, so I didn't see the point in mentioning it. I wasn't hiding it, but I didn't have any specific plans to tell him. The situation worsened and we both said hurtful things. I mentioned Elliot's mother, who I knew nothing about. I didn't care about her, but I made it appear that I did. From what I understood, Edward had raised Elliot on his own. Our situations are similar, but Edward insists on their differences. He says it's important that Arthur isn't biologically mine, but I don't think it changes anything. I didn't want Arthur to learn he was adopted before he could fully comprehend. We have never had an argument like this before. The only time we had a similar conversation was when I told him about my background. I thought this was important because it directly affected me. He was understanding, and there was much less conflict. Now I'm not sure if not telling about Arthur was the best decision. He's a nice guy, but this caught me off guard, and we both said things we regretted. Am I an idiot for not telling my boyfriend that my son is adopted? Not a good idea at this point. Arthur is your child. You are his mother. Nobody else cares about the details. Besides, it's not like you heard it from Edward. He just never showed up. Because it does not sound like you are thinking about it anymore, which makes you an excellent adoptive mother. I mean, he's been in your life for nearly a decade, and I doubt you're thinking about him all the time. Adopted. 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 Why would you share that with Edward? Maybe you'd do it if the opportunity presented itself. Or if you're discussing that period in your life. Perhaps it wouldn't. Regardless, I don't see the issue. I agree that she is his mother. But if you are blending families, you should inform the other parent about the adopted child, primarily for medical reasons. In my opinion, it has the potential to be extremely medically relevant if he is caring for the son while she is unavailable for any reason. Also, for emotional reasons, I believe you should share that if you are blending families. The longer the relationship, the more it will feel like a lie perpetrated by someone on a mission to keep you from understanding the reality of your situation. I believe Opie's Nydia would agree. You're the idiot. Your son is far too old to not know about his adoption. We begin telling babies before they are verbal. Your decision, if correct, is abusive and will cause him trauma because he is so old. You should contact the family therapist right away and work with them to tell this boy his history and help him process the death of his birth mother. I don't care about your boyfriend, but his attitude towards adoption is disgusting. I, a 28-year-old female, and my 29-year-old fiancé have been engaged for 3 months and dating for 2.5 years. Everything was going well, and we were very happy. However, we recently encountered some problems. We are not having a wedding ceremony, primarily because we want to have children soon and do not want to spend that much money. Because both of our families live abroad, flying everyone out and saving the money for a down payment on a house would be prohibitively expensive. We decided to buy a house together, marry legally, and start a family once we were settled. This is where the problems stem from. I'm from a farming family. My parents are not farmers, so my time is spent on fruits and vegetables rather than animals. My dream has always been to have a farm for personal use rather than a job, but my fiancé does not want that. and I have accepted that. My chickens, on the other hand, are something I cannot compromise on. I have 10 chickens, and he knows it. So, when I went house hunting, I looked for a house with a decent backyard so that I could raise them as freely as they do in the house I'm currently renting. After I told him I was bringing my chickens to our new house, he became distant and avoided me. But I didn't realize it until a week later when I asked him. After avoiding him for a week, I decided to visit him at his home to discuss things. This past Saturday, I asked what was wrong with him. He said that he expected me to get rid of my chickens before moving in with him, which is why he was putting up with it, but that he didn't want chickens in our house and that it was making him reconsider our relationship because, in his words, he didn't want someone who came with the package and then asked me to get rid of my chickens. This made me very angry, and I admit that I lost it. I burst into tears, telling him that my chickens were more important to me than our relationship. Not true at all. I said this without thinking, in a state of panic, so if he didn't agree that my chickens were coming with me, we were done. I got into my car and drove home, where I spent the entire day crying. He tried calling me, but I didn't answer because I didn't want to say anything I didn't mean, as I told him in a message. On Sunday, I felt better and called him. We agreed to meet for coffee that afternoon. Talk about it. I began by apologizing for what I said, and I told him it was not how I felt at all, to which he responded that he knew I didn't mean it and didn't hold it against me. I decided to be honest with him and tell him about the phone, how it was my life dream, and how it affected me not to have it when we could easily afford it. We quote, both engineers with decent salaries, and he wouldn't have to do anything about it. I admitted that I was unaware of the impact this had on me until he asked me to get rid of my chickens, which I did. As strange as it may sound, I love as if they were my own children. Finally, they asked me to get rid of the last piece of my childhood dream, which irritated me greatly. He said I was being selfish and that he needed some time to think about whether this was how he wanted his life to be going forward, which I accepted. To be honest, I do not understand. I talked to my best friend about it, and she told me to just give up on the farm, implying that I was wrong. But I assume she didn't want to tell me directly. My fiancé and I haven't spoken since then. I'm giving him space to reflect on our situation. Am I truly in the wrong here? I genuinely don't understand why this is such a big deal, and I suspect he doesn't love me as much as I thought. If he doesn't want my dreams to come true and is eating me alive, marrying him will be a bad decision. You quote, not compatible. Do not proceed, and pay attention to the use of selfish. He may not realize it, but it's a two-way street. He is, in fact, selfish, expecting you to give up your personal dreams without any effort on his part. He clearly does not want to compromise. He only wants to get his way and doesn't care what he wants. If he acts like this every time they disagree on something, their marriage will be a disaster. He doesn't want a package deal. That's nonsense. That package includes everything important in your life. From in-laws to hopes and dreams, jobs to personal beliefs. He takes all of you, even with flaws and regrets. None of you. What quote s crazy is that you could find a man willing to build you a farm. Someone who, in some small way, supports your dream.